All right, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going deep on something super important in organizations.
Oh, yeah.
And, we talk a lot on the show about meetings and the importance of meetings and, having those conversations.
Yeah.
This is kind of the flip side of that. This is about what are the conversations we're not having
Right, right.
and how those missing conversations are actually what cause so many problems for us in the workplace and in
Yeah,
organizations.
absolutely. I think it's fascinating, this idea of missing conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And the source material kind of broke it down into like three reasons why these conversations go missing.
Okay.
The first is we're just not aware that a conversation even needs to happen.
Hmm.
The second is that there's something we're avoiding.
Right.
Maybe it's a difficult conversation. Maybe it's something that we just don't want to deal with. And then the third is that sometimes during adversity, we just kind of push those conversations to the side.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And the source material starts off with this really great anecdote about a CEO who is presenting this grow or die strategy to her leadership team.
Right.
Right? And she's like, "We've got to grow or we're going to die." And everyone's like, "Yeah, yeah, grow or die sounds good." But then when she digs a little deeper and actually listens to the tone of some of the responses, um she starts to pick up on this hesitation,
Uh-huh.
and the CFO and HR director both kind of echo back this grow or die, as a question, right?
Yeah. Well,
And it dawns on her that everyone's nodding their heads, but there are actually so many unspoken questions and assumptions, and they're not actually all on the same page.
right. Right.
And that's the point. She almost missed this entirely just because everyone was like, "Yeah, grow and die."
And I think that's what's so interesting about this. The example is that it is so common, and it's so easy to do, especially as you move up in an organization.
Hmm.
You become the leader, and people aren't necessarily going to challenge you as much. And what happens is these missing conversations, these things that are not actually being addressed, start to kind of fester a little bit,
Hmm.
and it creates this gap between what the leader thinks is happening and what's actually happening on the ground.
Absolutely.
And I think that's where this deep dive is really going to be helpful for you, the learner, because the goal here is to give you some tools to actually identify these conversations that are missing in your own life, in your own organization,
Yeah.
and give you some actionable approaches that you can use to kind of start closing that gap.
Yeah, and what I think is interesting about the source material too is the way that the author kind of frames up the examples that are used. Right. So there are a lot of real world case studies, and it sounds like the author has spent a lot of time, consulting and coaching leaders,
Yeah.
and they've seen this stuff over and over. But in order to maintain confidentiality, the author uses what they call a Frankenstein approach.
Okay.
So essentially, what they do is they take elements from different cases and kind of blend them together to tell a story.
Right.
But none of the stories are directly attributable to any one person.
Okay. Yeah.
So it kind of protects the anonymity of the people involved, which I think is important in leadership coaching because you really want to build that trust.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so the deep dive that we're doing today is gonna follow the kind of structure that the author laid out, and
Right.
and there are basically four sections to the book, and each one corresponds to one of the main reasons for missing conversations.
Okay.
So the first one is awareness, just a lack of awareness that a conversation needs to happen. The second one is avoidance,
Uh-huh.
right? So these are the conversations that we're actively trying to avoid.
Yeah. Yeah.
The third one is adversity, and that's where the pressure of the situation actually makes us kind of deprioritize having important conversations.
Right.
And then finally, the fourth one is kind of looking at conversations as part of a larger organizational system,
Okay.
right? And the idea that when humans work together, we can actually accomplish so much more than individuals working in isolation.
Absolutely. I think it's interesting to think about. We're talking about missing conversations, and we're talking about systems thinking.
Yeah.
But so often in our culture, we tend to focus on the individual leader, the hero leader, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like the Steve Jobs and the Sheryl Sandbergs and the Elon Musks.
Yeah.
And while those people are great, and there's certainly things to learn from them, um, I think there's there's this missing piece where we don't really talk about um, how great teams function, right?
Right.
How do great teams actually come together and communicate and collaborate and get stuff done?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there aren't a lot of business books that really kind of unpack that.
Right. I mean, we have tons of business books on like dysfunctional teams and the, the things that can go wrong and individual team member behaviors and how to, be a good leader and have purpose.
Yeah, yeah, total.
But there's not a lot about like how have these successful teams actually navigated all these communication challenges and like put aside their egos to achieve something.
Right, absolutely.
So anyway, let's jump into the first kind of reason for missing conversations, which is just awareness.
Okay.
Right. A lack of awareness.
Yep.
So the first area that the author kind of focuses on is listening or waiting to attack.
Okay.
Okay, and they introduce us to this guy, Jake. Jake is he's described as like a quiet fighter. He's a 2-time cancer survivor.
Oh, wow.
Very intelligent, very persuasive. But the problem with Jake is that he's one of those people that's constantly like waiting to attack.
Oh,
So he's not really listening. He's just waiting for his turn to speak.
got it.
Okay. And what's interesting is that Jake's missing conversation wasn't like an external conversation with somebody else. It was really internal,
Uh-huh.
right? And it was driven by this deep need that he had to add value and to constantly
Yeah.
please others.
Okay.
And so this manifested in this behavior of like just not really listening, but just waiting for his turn to kind of jump in and add his 2 cents.
Interesting. So he thought he was listening. He thought he was contributing in a positive way.
Yeah.
But it sounds like other people didn't necessarily perceive it that way.
That's exactly right. So the author did this really interesting thing where they surveyed a bunch of people that Jake worked with.
Oh, wow.
Right. And it was like a 360-degree review.
Okay.
And like 90% of the people that they talked to
Wow.
said that his biggest issue as a leader was that he wasn't listening.
Oh, man.
Right. So that just goes to show that like his reality, his experience of listening was completely different from how other people were experiencing it.
That's huge.
Yeah. Yeah, and as the source material says, perception builds reality.
Right.
So even if Jake thought he was listening, if everyone else felt like he wasn't,
Yeah.
then that was reality.
Wow. Okay.
Mhm.
So what did he do? Like, how did he change that?
Once he got this feedback, I think it was a little bit of a wake up call for him.
Uh-huh.
But to his credit, he decided to make some changes.
Okay.
And so he set these 2 goals for himself. One was to listen with intent,
Okay.
and the second was to listen to connect.
Got it.
Right. And so this idea of listening to connect is basically seeking first to understand
Uh-huh.
and then to be understood.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And so to kind of put these goals into practice, he came up with some daily tactics, some things that he would do to kind of force himself to be a better listener.
Got it.
And some of these were like, strategic silence.
Oh, okay.
Right. So like, not always feeling the need to jump in.
Yeah, yeah.
Purposeful pauses before he spoke.
Uh-huh.
Kind of putting his ideas on ice, he would call it.
Yeah.
So he would write them down,
Yeah.
so he didn't feel like he had to like blurt them out.
Yeah.
He would use minimal responses.
Okay.
So just kind of acknowledging that he was listening, but not not jumping in with a whole diatribe.
Right, right.
He would practice paraphrase only.
Right.
So, if someone said something, he would just try to summarize it back to them
Yeah.
to make sure he understood.
Got it. Yeah.
And then finally he would ask better questions.
Oh.
So instead of just, kind of attacking, he would actually try to understand where the other person was coming from.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And the impact was actually huge. So after like 18 months of doing this, the author went back and surveyed the same group of people, and like unanimously they said that he had become an excellent listener.
Oh, wow.
Right.
That's amazing. So he went from like the worst listener to the best listener in 18 months.
That's incredible.
Yeah, yeah. And not surprisingly, his consulting firm also experienced like a pretty significant compound annual growth rate. Like I think it was like 50%.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So clearly this had like a real impact on his business as well. Yeah, for sure. So he just did this on his own, or did he have like a coach?
Well, so initially, I think he was just kind of doing it on his own.
Hmm.
But he's built in these systems now, where he keeps a journal, he talks to a coach every night,
Oh, wow.
and this is something that he focuses on specifically
Okay.
because he recognizes that this is not something that comes naturally to him.
Yeah.
He has to work at it.
So it sounds like he used, kind of Aristotle's golden mean principle.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. So the author mentions this idea of the golden mean, which is essentially finding the balance between two extremes.
yeah, yeah.
And so in Jake's case, it was, he was on one extreme of like never listening, always waiting to attack.
Right.
And so the strategy was to kind of overcorrect to the other extreme.
Oh, okay.
And so initially he was like almost, overly virtuous in his listening behaviors. Yeah.
Yeah, I get it.
But eventually he was able to kind of find that manageable middle,
Yeah.
that golden mean,
That golden mean. Right.
where he was listening effectively, but it wasn't like this huge effort for him all the time.
Yeah, it had become more natural for him.
Yeah, exactly. So this brings up some questions for you, the learner, to think about.
Yeah.
Like, what are your most productive communication behaviors?
Yeah.
What are the things that you do that really help you to connect with people and get your point across? And then conversely, what are some of your less effective behaviors?
Yeah.
Right? What are the things that you do that maybe aren't as helpful?
Right.
And where do these perceptions come from? Like, why do you think you have those behaviors?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
And then perhaps most importantly, would you even want to know if you had behaviors like Jake's initial listening style
Right.
that were actually like stifling your relationships and your results?
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, would you want to know?
Yeah.
And would you be open to hearing that feedback and making a change?
Yeah. So moving on, another area where a lack of awareness can really lead to missing conversations is in the distinction between the chain of communication
Okay.
versus the chain of command.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, that's a really important one.
Yeah. So organizational charts
Yeah.
kind of lay out for us, very clearly who reports to whom.
Right.
Right. That's the chain of command.
Right. The chain of command.
But the chain of communication, who actually talks to whom about what and when,
Yeah.
is often just as important, but it's usually invisible.
Right. It's not written down.
Yeah.
It's kind of this unspoken thing.
Yeah.
But it has a huge impact on how the organization functions.
Absolutely.
And I like the examples that the author gives here.
Yeah.
So for example, they talk about companies like Tesla and SpaceX.
Okay.
So they got pretty clear authority structures, right?
Yeah.
But they encourage a very flexible communication flow.
Okay.
So if you have a problem, you're supposed to go directly to the person who has the expertise to solve it, regardless of their position.
Yeah, I've heard that Elon's pretty good at like
He has like getting rid of
the layers. Yeah.
and just go right to the source.
Right.
Like go right to the person.
Yeah.
And then on the other hand, you've got something like the military,
Right.
where
Right.
they have very formal structures for
Yeah.
both command and communication.
Yeah.
And so it might be that things decisions get made a little bit slower.
Yeah.
But it also prevents mistakes from happening.
Yeah. I mean, you can imagine, in a combat situation.
You don't want people just freelancing and going off and doing their own thing.
Right.
You need to have clear communication.
Yeah.
You need to have a clear chain of command.
Yeah. So the key takeaway here, I think, is that when there's not a clear understanding of how these two the chain of communication and the chain of command interact with each other, that's when you tend to see an increase in organizational politics.
Oh, okay.
And so instead of focusing on like actually solving problems, people are worried about like, maneuvering for influence and taking credit.
Yeah.
And that's where, a lot of dysfunction can come from.
Right.
Okay, so another kind of subtle but really important area of unawareness is this idea of the lowering of standards.
Okay.
So the author, talks about how a lot of times when they're coaching clients and the clients are coming to them with like a complaint about a coworker's behavior, it's really a symptom of a deeper issue, which is that organizational standards have been allowed to slip.
Right.
So it might look like an individual problem, right?
Yeah.
But it's actually a symptom of a culture problem, which ultimately is a leadership problem.
Right. I mean, the leader sets the tone for the entire organization.
Exactly.
So if the leader is tolerating certain behaviors,
Yeah.
then that's going to filter down to the rest of the team.
Yeah, and the author makes this point that leaders that allow suboptimal behaviors,
Hmm.
right, or don't hold people accountable, they're creating environments
Hmm.
where poor results are kind of the norm.
Right.
There's a lack of trust,
Yeah.
and people actually start to celebrate mediocrity,
Oh, wow.
right? Like they're just happy to get by.
Yeah, and it becomes this thing where it's, almost incentivized by fear, right?
Yeah, yeah,
If you rock the boat, or
yeah,
if you try to raise the bar,
yeah,
you're going to get punished.
yeah, yeah,
So it's better to just kind of keep your head down and go with the flow.
and do just enough to not get fired.
Right, exactly.
And so the author uses this really great analogy of medicine 2.0
Okay.
versus medicine 3.0.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Okay, so the idea here is that a lot of times when leaders are thinking about communication, they're
Mhm.
operating in this medicine 2.0 mode,
Okay.
which is basically like we're gonna wait until something breaks and then
Yeah.
we're gonna fix it.
Right.
Reactive.
So it's like, okay, so we had this big communication breakdown.
Yeah.
Now we need to figure out how to prevent that from happening again.
Right.
But what they're not doing is thinking about, like, how do we proactively build healthy communication habits and systems
Yeah.
before those problems occur.
Right. And that's what they call medicine 3.0.
Okay.
Right. It's more of a preventative kind of developmental approach.
I like that.
Yeah, yeah.
That's good.
And so one area where this really comes into play is in performance reviews,
Okay.
right? So the author makes this point that performance reviews, if they're not done well,
Uh-huh.
they tend to focus too much on the past.
Okay.
Right? So it's like, okay, so here are all the things that you did wrong last year.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they tend to incrementally lower expectations over time.
Right. Right.
So it's like, okay, well, last year you were supposed to do this, but you only did this much. So this year we're going to lower the bar a little bit.
Yeah.
And then eventually what happens is that that leads to lower productivity overall.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
So it's like a downward spiral.
Exactly.
Lowered expectations lead to lower performance, which leads to even lower expectations.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And so the author has developed this process called review reboot.
Okay.
And it's a process for kind of creating these performance reviews that are really well defined, and they align with a company's purpose, their strategy,
Yep.
the behaviors they want to see in employees, and the results they want to achieve.
Got it. Yeah.
And so it's really like the why, the what, and the how, right? Like, why are we doing this?
Yeah.
What are we trying to achieve? And
Yeah.
how are we going to get there?
Right. Right.
And the author makes this really interesting point that a lot of times companies are really good at over-engineering the what,
Okay.
right? Like the KPIs
Yeah.
and the OKRs,
Right.
but they don't pay enough attention to the how,
Got it. Yeah.
right? Like, how are we actually going to communicate this information in a way that fosters improvement and connects back to the company's purpose?
Absolutely.
Right. So
Yeah.
so that's kind of a really subtle but important point.
Right.
Okay, so let's move on to the next kind of area of awareness, which is thirsty horses.
Okay. Thirsty horses. I like it.
Yeah.
I like the analogy.
Yeah, so this is all about motivation,
Okay.
right? And
Yeah.
and we all know this saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink.
Right.
Right?
Classic. Yeah.
But the author actually challenges this a little bit and says that it's not really about the horse, it's about the rider.
Oh, interesting.
Right.
Okay.
So it's the leader's responsibility to understand their own goals, their own perceptions, their communication style,
Yeah.
the strength of their relationship with the horse.
Right. Yeah.
And that's really what's gonna determine whether or not the horse drinks.
So it's less about forcing the horse to drink
Yeah.
and more about, like, creating an environment where the horse is actually thirsty, wants to drink.
Exactly. And so effective motivation, it's not about like one size fits all incentives.
Right. It's about
It's
understanding the individual.
exactly. It's
Yeah.
about understanding what truly drives each individual team member,
Hmm.
what their needs are, what their preferred ways of working are.
Right, right.
The whole kind of context of the work environment.
Yeah.
And so the author mentions a few different tools for kind of understanding people's their drives and their needs,
Okay.
and one of them is the predictive index,
Oh, yeah.
which has actually been around since 1955.
Wow.
So this is not a new idea.
Right.
And essentially it's a way to kind of get some data and insights into people's their drives, their needs, their preferred workplace behaviors. Okay.
And so the author calls this kind of approach uh, people analytics,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
And so the idea is that if we can better understand the people that we're working with,
Yeah.
then we can connect with them better, communicate more effectively, and ultimately motivate them more successfully.
Right.
Right.
And I think that's what the author calls leadership leverage, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Getting more done through others.
Yeah. Leverage.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I think it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking, well, I'm providing all the resources, I'm providing all the support.
Yeah.
Why aren't my people performing? And I think the source material really challenges us to kind of look inward and say, okay, well, how have I contributed to this situation,
Right.
right? And do I really understand what motivates each person on my team?
Right. Right.
Because we all have different motivators.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And while behaviors can be flexible.
The underlying drives and needs tend to be more consistent.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's really about understanding those deeper motivators.
Right.
And the author gives this really great missing conversation quick fact for awareness.
Okay.
And it's as simple as asking someone how to do a task effectively.
Okay.
Right? And so this question can immediately bring focus to performance,
Yeah.
but it can also reveal any gaps in understanding about roles and responsibilities.
Oh, yeah. I like that.
Right.
It's so simple,
Yeah, yeah.
but it can be really powerful.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next kind of awareness point is using